And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Give it way up for baked salmon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. How about that mellowed out cover of Sky High, huh? Welcome to Art Stinks 2. You asked for it, you got it. At least one of you asked for this. I mean, probably, right? I could go check the comments under the last art show video, but what's the point, really? Surely this is by request. So, having decided that a check for actual requests is unnecessary, let's begin, shall we? Art is glamorous, wouldn't you say? It's what I was saying when I made this photo collage. This is the inside of the tiny-ass cabin I was living in after my life went into a skid at about age 30. It was roughly 8 feet wide by 16 feet long. It didn't have plumbing, but thankfully it did have a hardwired internet connection. There was a solar shower outside the door, plus there was a big house on the property where I could use the restroom. I cooked all of my food on a hot plate and didn't buy anything that needed refrigeration as I had no refrigerator. But this was where I lived like a friggin' hobbit for about a year and a half while working on an art degree. I was good-natured about the fine mess I had found myself in, and the statement that art is glamorous was an attempt at humor. It's gotten funnier as time goes on, I can say that. Warhol on welfare. This was for an assignment in one of my computer design classes. It's not particularly genius, but neither was Warhol. It certainly was appropriate. Living in that cabin without a fridge, top ramen and cup of soup were easy to store, easy to cook, and cheap as hell. It was literally a big part of who I was at that time. I wish I still had this. They let me print it out on the supersized printer at school, so it was like 4 feet square. Sadly, leaving the lap of luxury of the fur trapper's cabin and going on couch tour, I was constantly having to let stuff go to the universe. I commonly kept my worldly possessions within 2 milk crates. It was pretty liberating. Fast forward to today, and whittling down my crap to that size would probably take a couple months. Given the space to expand, I can be quite the hoarder. For a couple of years, I had a spot in a local coffee shop where I was permitted to hang and sell my art. Since I had to bicycle there, I had to come up with clever ways to get the art there unscathed. This was a particularly genius feat of engineering here. I drew the crappy person there so you could get the gist of how the whole thing would fit on my back. I was like an urban Sherpa on 2 wheels. I'm sure it looked stupid as hell, but it got the job done. This photo here sort of looks like it was ripped right out of a skateboard magazine. I've flipped through my share of skate mags, so I should know. The idea is simple if not inane. My son and I went and found a medium-sized branch at the park, then mounted skateboard trucks and wheels to the branch. It was a fair amount of work all told just to get this one shot. Worth it? Oh, hell yeah. Here are some teacup doodlings that I've done. We will return to Art Stinks 2 after a word from our sponsor. Now out from Baked Home Entertainment.
Rah, 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 sis boom ba, but.
Saved by the Bell like you've never seen it before.
You are about to take the most important thing you're ever gonna do. You ready? I got it for you. It's in my pocket, and you guys have to reach in there and get it yourself. I won't use my hands, and neither can you.
All 86 original episodes remastered and overdubbed by comedian Nikki Chuckles.
You smell that? Yeah, I think somebody farted. Is this toilet paper? Must be. Do you think they left the toilet paper on purpose? Dude, that's just gross. Can you put it down? Put it in the garbage for fuck's sake.
Fun for the entire family. Saved by Nikki's Bell. Order now. Order now for Saved by Nikki's Bell. Just 4 easy payments of $29.99. Call 1-800-69-SCREECH. Operators are standing by. I spent the better part of a year working at a film studio painting props. It was a relatively small lot, but they had some semi-well-known shows under their belt. Renegade, Silk Stockings, Veronica Mars. By the time I started working there, the only shows being filmed were Spanish novellas for the Mexican market. I met Richard Dreyfuss there. Well, he was touring the lot and happened to stand near me and watch what I was doing for a minute or so. And what was it that I was doing specifically? Well, as I said, they were not filming much on the lot by the time I was hired. Instead, they were under contract to supply the U.S. military with recreations of Afghanistan villages for training purposes. Check it out.
Our heritage is unique. One of the largest independent television and movie studios in America, in 2002, created Strategic Operations and changed the face of training, simulation, and education. Strategic Operations introduced the magic of Hollywood to live military and public safety training, transforming sterile training environments into dynamic recreations of any real-world situation that could be imagined. TV and movie special effects artists create realistic battlefield effects, including rocket-propelled grenades, mines, and explosions from improvised explosive devices. Smoke, sound, and smell add the highest level of realism safely to simulate the fog of war.
I was in charge of the street vendor tables and carts. Mostly I was airbrushing the fake fruits and vegetables, occasionally fish stands. These little babies were a batch that I painted. We had to paint them a little more vivid than reality, as they would get covered with a slurry of fake acrylic ice and clear resin. Looking through the semi-opaque ice would give a blurry view of the fish, and the now muted colors would look spot on. Sometime after that job ended, I took a job helping a local company that makes parade floats. My first task was to turn this dusty, decaying styrofoam pig into a couple large, goofy jack-o'-lanterns for a Halloween parade. The pig itself was somewhat of a celebrity. Remember I mentioned they filmed Veronica Mars at the studio I had worked for?
If the Lilith House's mission was to protect women on campus, I'm not sure this display is doing the trick. Sure, the Board of Trustees voted to dismantle the Greek system, but there's still a rapist at large.
By a boring series of events, the pig ended up at my house, and I got to work. In order to rough cut the foam into basic pumpkin shapes, I had to create this hot wire contraption out of scrap wood, a transformer, and if I remember correctly, nickel cadmium wire that I purchased from a model train store. Talk about DIY. I tried using guitar strings, but they would heat up pretty quick, which in turn weakened the wires, causing them to break quickly. When it was working well, I could shave off the foam in sheets. It was like peeling an apple with a peeler. Necessity is a mother, as they say. The final pumpkins were pretty well received. I don't have a lot to show in the way of logos. It's really kind of a boring topic if you're not in the logo game, but I do have a couple things. Solid Rock Engineering, SRE. The request by the customer was to design something that was blatantly patriotic. I'll tell you what, every time I look at the way the star resides in the negative space between the S and the R, while the E is made up of 3 red stripes, I can't help but say, nailed it. Unfortunately, the customer asked for the E to be more defined, like this. This was their edit, and I frankly didn't care for it. I prefer the sleeker, less defined E, but customer's always right. The other logo-related piece I want to show you starts with this. I was out driving one day and I got this strange idea to try and merge 3 corporate logos into one as a sort of challenge, a game. I considered this a fun idea. That's the level of nerd that I'm capable of. So I started looking around for logos while I was driving. Within a minute, I had Carl's Jr., or Hardee's to anyone that's east of the Mississippi, and McDonald's. They were perfect because they shared similar colors, red and yellow. 5 minutes down the road, I saw a Shell station, and I was ready to go. I got home, downloaded the logos, and brought them into Photoshop. I made them all the same yellow and red, and then I started mashing them together. Well, this is what I came up with in a contest against nobody and for no reason. Kitty's Roadkill Burgers. I admit it's a shitty logo, but it's a winner under the circumstances. The last Art Stinks video, I showed the CD art for my son's band, Chasing Norman. F's in the chat, the band is no more. However, since the last video, I found the original art they provided, and what I based the drawing on. Of course, the CD art needed to be square, so I had to move some elements around. Of relative interest is that this was actually the second idea for the CD. The first was given to me as so. There is an enormous guitar hovering over the earth. The neck meanders through space and leads to a figure that is walking into a wormhole. Pretty trippy, very rock and roll. I can say that getting such a complete reference is not common enough when creating art from someone else's idea. Too often you are starting with a vague idea and expecting many changes. Good on them for providing something this complete. Here's what I slaved over for days, only to have them switch to the monkeys. Granted, the monkeys were cooler. This rendition of their idea was pretty solid though. Well, I did all that in Photoshop, so let's knock out the photo manipulation. These next 3 are my attempts at meme-ish humor. Dwight Power. I had to check Google to see if this was an original idea. The funny thing is, I did find versions of the idea, but they were all Dwight Eisenhower. What, is my grandfather making memes now? Rastafari. Old cheerful Ross Geller. Hi guys. The biggest downer on any sitcom ever. Though his bit where he's trying to squeeze into leather pants was priceless. Bling Crosby. Yeah, it's sort of low-hanging fruit, but the photo editing, huh? Not too rad. More traditional art. This is the first thing that I ever painted with any real intention to hang it on a wall. It wasn't an original idea. I saw it in a book of Japanese art and wanted it, so I recreated it. Later on, someone saw it hanging in my house and paid me to recreate it for them. It was the first time someone paid me to paint a picture for them. And let's just say I got paid in the mid-high 3 digits. I was stoked. This piece was 4 feet high and 8 feet wide, painted on Baltic birch and coated with a satin finish. Here is another example of how I like to use layers. I can't be satisfied with just a painting oftentimes. I need to incorporate hardware and different types of wood. It's basically signage when I think about it. This one has a graphic representation of a kabuki actor with the words, are you ready for this? Mr. Sakai doesn't drink coffee in the morning. I can't explain myself. I just picture Mr. Sakai's co-workers saying, yeah, well maybe he should. Now everyone has seen the great Kanagawa wave, I'm sure. It's a very famous image. Well, I stole the wave, stripped it down to its basic elements, and threw in a surfer getting handed his ass. Looking at the picture, I thought about dudes who go for extreme sports, like Evel Knievel. Well, Brian Regan has a bit where Evel Knievel gets asked, what was going through your mind just before you crashed and broke every bone in your body?
What kind of question is that? What were you thinking right before you hit the ground, Evel? What were you thinking? I remember thinking, hey, did I turn off the iron? Then my leg cracked in half. Then I was thinking, hey, maybe I should get a puppy. What do you think I was thinking? I was thinking, something like that, if I remember right. Let me go back. Yeah. I believe those are my thoughts.
So playing off of that, the verbiage here on the painting says, a thought occurred to me. Maybe I should get a puppy. I painted eyes a few times in high contrast. I was kind of on a high contrast kick. I really like that stuff. It's like how far can you strip it down before it becomes unrecognizable? For this one, I think the best incorrect guess I got was from my brother. He guessed it was Janis Joplin, and that's a pretty solid guess. When you see who it is, there's no mistake. This is Mr. John Lennon. Now these eyes are made up of 2 layers, of course, and why wouldn't they be? If it's hard to figure it out, don't be dismayed. Our brains react to what we see and not always what we know. This person's eyes are fairly iconic for a generation. Charles Manson. Now before I say the name of this person, I'll stall a moment so that those who wish to can venture a guess. I will tell you this, he is one of the most prolific and widely known songwriters that ever lived. Eddie Ledbetter, Leadbelly. His songs have been covered by Bob Dylan, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Elvis Presley, ABBA, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Grateful Dead, Van Morrison, The Beach Boys, The Animals, White Stripes, Meatloaf, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nirvana, Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin. The dude's a legend, so I painted him. Now, despite his legendary status, I knew there was a good chance after hanging this in the coffee shop that nobody would buy it. But check this out. Great work, man. Just bought this at Lestat's last night. I wrote part of my book on prison slavery and the formations of U.S. racial genocide, focusing on this maestro of black folk blues music. The piece now hangs on my living room wall. Again, wonderful work. So this guy that bought it, it turns out, was a professor at UCSD here in San Diego. It meant so much to me to get his feedback. It's the same with comments under the videos. I have never made a living from painting. I certainly don't from making videos. The drive is there to make something that others can enjoy, dig? This was especially cool because it almost seems as though I painted it for him. I like to think I did. The Meat Men. I dug this one. The 4 pieces of wood that I used to make the base were just cut off corners from a different project. I butted the 4 corners together and decided to bastardize 4 corporate logos as one does. The guy who bought this was running the Harvey Milk Diner in San Diego. He was a chef. He said he hung it in his kitchen at home, and I love that. Hellmans and Mad Heroes. I wish the image was of a higher quality. I painted this on mahogany. The subject here, with the head shaped like an old-timey microphone, made an appearance in a piece I shared last time. Here, he sits as if he's meditating, but floats a foot or 2 off the ground. I really cannot explain the idea. The poker hand above him is 2 pairs. 2 weak pairs, actually, 2s and 3s. In his hands below, he has a pack of Mad Heroes, which were candy cigarettes from my youth, and a jar of Hellman's sandwich spread. His legs, from my memory, were drawn with the stripes because I had shortly before painting this seen a trippy photo of David Bowie, and the trousers stuck out in my mind. I really made some odd choices with this one. The green rectangle is blatantly off-center. If you can see the thin red border that goes around it, I popped it out a little on the bottom right, simply because I liked the way it looked. The kanji at the top, I went with the reflective gold. I think it works, but it's weird even for me. What it says is basically, where there is a will, there is a way. As zany as it is, I friggin' love it. And the person who ended up with it, they apparently really, really loved it. This piece was stolen from the wall at the coffee shop. As much as I would have liked to have been paid for it, I couldn't help but feel flattered. It is the only time that it's happened, and I feel like I can live with that just one time. Now this is just the concept art for a painting I did. The style is that of old propaganda posters. The sentiment comes from a comment that Jello Biafra said on one of his albums. I probably should add this to Bake Salmon's closet. I really like the design. The saxophone Z, and how the marquee lights from the other letters are the buttons on the sax. So I mentioned concept art in the last Art Stinks video. What I will often do is work up an idea on the computer because it's a tool, and that's just my process. Then I'll take the printout and use it as my guide. So the circus signage was the inspiration for the look of this, but there was no Merman Z sign that I was going off of. This fever dream just came out of my head. I painted the name ᴳᵃᵏᵉᵈⁿှᵃ directly to the inside of the glass. The wainscoting was utilized again for the base. I painted the creature on a piece of wood and cut it out with a coping saw. I elevated that off the back wall using a little block of wood. To explain its existence, the ᴳᵃᵏᵉᵈⁿှᵃ, what is presumably a carnival attraction, I state, discovered by Sir Winston St. Clair, found off the southern coast of the Dark Continent. And then to that, I glued a small rustic-looking map of the southern region of Africa. On the left side, I again pasted a bill reading, Mr. Darwin, can you explain this? Is this nature's trick? I somehow had it in my head that such a circus would have existed around the time that Darwin was making headlines, so it would have made sense to ask Evolution Boy how he thinks this freak of nature could have come to be. The circus company at the top, ᴳᵃᵏᵏᵉᵈⁿှᵃ and Menderchuk. I like to use strange and exotic names in these pieces. Before I say where I got these names, I bet someone out there remembers them. ᴳᵃᵏᵏᵉᵈⁿှᵃ and Menderchuk.
Rod Torfelson's Armada featuring Herman Menderchuk. And introducing the Dudettes.
The Dudettes?
Kids in the Hall. Great comedy stuff there. I draw ideas from any and everywhere, and I love to throw in what are basically Easter eggs when I'm painting. This one says Rentgen. The main reason I even painted this was this guy. His image has long been etched in my brain since I used to see it all the time in comic book classifieds. As I've stated before, what you see is usually what you get when you look at my art. This isn't deep, it's kitschy, and meant to be visually appealing and relatively unique. I will wager that this one is unique. I've always loved the amoeba shapes and boomerang designs from the mid-century furniture and wallpaper. I mean, that stuff was already old when I was a child, but it was still something I would encounter from time to time. You pretty much never see it anymore. That period of US pop culture makes me think of three things: astronauts, cigarettes, and martinis. So a mashup of it all made complete sense, and that is the inspiration of the piece. I used various materials here. The bar that he rests his arm on is on top of the amoeba, layers again. And the boomerang itself, I didn't want it behind the amoeba. I wanted it in the amoeba or through the amoeba. So what I did to make it happen is drilled holes in the edge of the board and bent pieces of aluminum rod. Then I stuck them in the holes. It looks like the rod is like this, right? Running completely through it. But actually, it's like this. It's just three separate pieces of aluminum rod. Here's a fun reconstruction of a corporate logo. Does Bob's Big Boy still exist? I don't know. Anyways, it's just a fun idea that I had, and I really like how it turned out. I painted it on mahogany, then made a solid frame from a 2x2. The frame itself, and some of the radial beams emanating from behind Big Boy, I painted with metallic gold. I suppose if there was a joke to be had here besides the obvious, it would be that people whose deities have a bluish hue are usually vegetarians, so there is the irony of having a mascot of a burger chain parading as Krishna. William S. Burroughs. Burroughs was a beat writer, an interesting one at that. There's a real-life story about him wherein he was hopped up on benzodrine or something down in Mexico. He and his wife thought it would be fun to amaze their fellow partiers with a William Tell routine that they had worked out. It didn't end well. Burroughs shot his bride in the face, then fled Mexico. He was never arrested, assuming the story is even true, but I would expect a firearm to trigger awful memories, and seeing him holding a rifle stood out to me. He was a writer, so I chose to mount some typewriter keys to the board. Well, I only had 6 typewriter keys to use, and I was amused to find out that I could spell out gun oil, so I did. One sort of Easter egg, I guess, is the overlapping pattern behind him. I actually got the idea from the set of Conan O'Brien, swear to God. It's not an exact copy of it, but I absolutely was watching Conan and thought, hey, that looks neat. I saved my 2 favorites for last. This first is very detailed, and the second is hardly detailed at all. This was painted on a cabinet door I salvaged from somebody's garbage. The sign advertises a fortune teller who goes by the name Jade Oracle. a name that I pulled out of thin air. I made the peculiar choice of suspending a sign from the sign. It's as redundant as it is interesting. Layers, man, layers. The amount of aging and distressing I did is pretty evident. I like to go a little overboard when making the point that something is old. The letters on the hanging sign have first been carved out, a detail that is only obvious when viewed up close. To make the paint crack, I first paint little splotches with Elmer's glue. Then when that's dry, I paint the acrylic on top, and when the acrylic paint dries, well, those areas form cracks. The crystal ball, that's a lens that I salvaged from a projection TV somebody was throwing out. To hold it in place, on the bottom I have two brackets. They look as though they could be feet from a base holding the crystal ball. Then I used two wood screws at the top to prevent the lens from falling out in the other direction. Now I didn't want the screws to be seen, so it was pretty handy that I had the idea to layer the hands. The middle fingers hide the screws perfectly. That's another moment of pure inspiration. Finally, a piece that I made for a show with a conspiracy theme. I call this the Illuminati nightlight. The top is a crystal pyramid. The base is made of mahogany. It is illuminated by an LED light I set inside, and a power cord comes out the back. It was a simple idea, and its appearance belies the actual work that went into it. There were just various things which had to be overcome. The final piece is beautiful, and I hope to one day have the perfect place to display it. Well, that is Art Stinks 2. I really hope it was interesting. For the most part, the pieces that I shared have not been thought about or discussed for a while. It's nice to go through them and remember it all once again, and share them with the salmon community. If you've made it this far, I think you may be a fish head. Don't worry, bro, I won't tell anyone. As always, give it way up for my patrons, huh?
Dummy Data, Kelp Pill, Tech Rex 71, Cat G, West Most, Michael's TCAP Channel, Ramiro San, TCAP Recipes, Aerodo, Gram, M1A, Dr. K, Tiffany Lockhart, Amanda James, Joey's TCAP Channel, Michelle Simpson, Joran Comedy, and the ever-lovable Gooey Who.
Consider coming by the Patreon and see what's on offer. We have a pretty stellar Discord that's kicking. I would love to see you there. And don't forget Baked Salmon's Closet for all your baked salmon and bake line attire. I guess I'll see you next time.